So now that we've gone over the basics of graphing and we have determined what the x-axis is and the y-axis is, so your x values are the numbers that you're going to plot on the x-axis and your y values are the numbers that you're going to plot on the y-axis. Let's try a practice problem here. So we'll have the x-axis be purple. So we'll start right here and we'll draw a purple line for the x-axis and we'll put a little arrow to show that that goes to infinity. And then we'll take pink for the y-axis. And the y-axis, remember, it doesn't go side to side like the x-axis does. It starts in the same place that the x-axis does, but it goes up. So in the previous video, I called this the amount line, and I called the x-axis the time line. And where both of these axes start, the x-axis and the y-axis, they both have to share the same starting point at 0. So that's why they're lined up like that. They both start at the same point. The x-axis goes to the right, the y-axis goes up, because that starting point is 0. So let's try a practice problem. You deposit $10,000 in a bank account that earns interest every year. Graph the first 4 years of interest earned. So we have this little table over here showing us how much interest you earned each year. Which one would be the x-axis values? Which column would be the x values? So the x values would be the years, because we usually use time on the x-axis if we can, if time is a choice. So your x values would be this column right here. And so that leaves our y-axis, which would be the amount, which would be the interest earned. And so your y values would be this column right here in the pink. So when we go to graph this, we're going to be looking at each row of numbers. We're going to be looking at the 0, 0, the 1, 100, the 2, 250, the 3, 450, and the 4, 700, because we have to have one x value and one y value to end up making a dot on the graph. So let's start with the first set of numbers. On years, you have, for the x value, you have a 0, because this is when you just opened the bank account, so it's year 0. A year hasn't passed by yet. And over here on the interest, you have earned 0 interest at that time, because as I said, you just opened your bank account. It's year 0, so you've earned 0 interest so far. So how do we graph that? Well, we go down to our x-axis, which is in purple, and we go to where the 0 is, which is the corner that we've made where the x-axis meets the y-axis. And we also look at the 0 in the y values, and that's also 0, so that stays down there at that 0 of the y-axis. So the y-axis and the x-axis is 0 is the same 0. They share a 0. So we're just going to fill that in like a big old dot for your first set of values, 0, 0. Now, before we go any farther, let's label these. Your x-axis in the purple, going from side to side, is going to be your time. And this time, we're going to be doing this in years. And then your y-axis going up is going to be the amount. That's going to be the interest earned. So interest. And since we don't have enough squares here to make each individual square $1 because we got to go up to $700 here in this problem. So we're going to make each two squares $100. We're going to count by 100s. So we're going to make each of these increments $100. And we're going to label that, when we label our y-axis, we're going to label that next to the interest. We're going to say in hundreds of dollars, just like we put the time in years down here on the bottom of the x-axis. So the years is going to be every other square, and that's each going to represent 1 year. So now we can continue on. Let's look at our second set of numbers. Now we're at 1 year. So in 1 year, you earned $100 of interest. So the 1 year is going to be your x value. So we're going to count over to the right 1 increment. So here's 1 right here. So that's going to be 1 year. But we're not going to put our dot there because we still need to go up on the y-axis up to $100. So the first increment on the y-axis is $100. So when we graph this, we're going to count over from 0 to the right 1 year, and then we're going to count up to the $100, and that's where we're going to make our dot. So now we have 2 dots. We have a dot at the 0 mark, and we have a dot at the $100 mark. 1 year and $100. Now let's look at our third set of values. Now we're on year 2, and in year 2 we earned $250 worth of interest. So let's deal with the x values first. The x-axis is 2 years. So we're going to count over from the 0 2 increments. That's 2 years. But we're not going to make our dot there. First we're going to move up on the y-axis up to $250. So remember, we had $100 was this first 2 squares, and then so $200 is going to be the next 2 squares. Let's mark that 200. And then the next increment is going to be 300. So how do we graph 250? Well, 250 is going to be in the middle between the 200 and the 300. And remember, we're in year 2, so that's going to be on this line in year 2. And $250 is going to be right here between the $200 and the $300. So that's going to be our next dot. Now let's look at our fourth set of numbers. We're on year 3 now. So that's going to be our x value. So year 3, we're going to count over from 0 to the right 3 increments. So here's going to be year 3. But we're not going to put our dot there. We're going to count up the y-axis to how much interest we earned, which up at the table, if you look, is $450. So we're going to go up to $450 on this line that says 3 for the x value. Here's $300 is right here on the y-axis. $400 is right here on the y-axis. And then $500 is this next increment we have on the y-axis. Well, so 450 would fall in between the 400 and the 500. So when we go to graph this and make a dot, we're going to count over. First, we're going to do the time. We're going to count over from 0, 1, 2, 3 to the 3rd year. And then we're going to go up to in between $400 and $500, and that's going to give us 450. Now let's go to our fifth set of numbers. Our x value is 4 and our y value is 700. So in our x value, we're going to count over to the right from 0. We're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. So here's 4 years. And then we got $700 in interest for our y value that we need to graph. So we're going to stay on this line that has the 4 years on it, and we're going to go all the way up until we get to $700. So that would be 600, and this would be $700 right here. So now we have plotted 5 dots. Don't forget the dot and the 0. There's the 0 right here. We have a dot and the 0, and then we have a dot at the 1 year mark for $100. We have a dot at the 2 year mark for $250. We have a dot at the 3 year mark for $450, and we have a dot at the 4 year mark for $700. So now all we have to do is connect those dots together with straight lines, as straight as you can make them. So you should really use a ruler for this if you're doing this by hand. And that's going to be our line graph of interest earned over a 4-year period of time in your bank account. Okay, so now that we did that problem, we're going to move on to a slightly more complex problem. It's the same problem, but notice the question down here is changed. The question down here is graph the total amount in your bank account over 4 years of earning interest. So what we're looking at, the key words here is total amount. So remember, you started out with $10,000, deposited it in your bank account, and then you earned all this interest on top of it over the series of 4 years. So we need to do some calculations first in order to find out what the total amount of money is in your bank account before we can graph that. So if you look up at your chart up here, your table, we have the years here at the first, nothing's changed, same thing. So year 0, year 1, year 2, year 3, and year 4. And then your interest is $0 when you first open it up, you earned 0 interest. Then the first year, after the first year, you have $100 of interest. After the second year, you earn $250 of interest. After the third year, you earned $450 of interest. And after the fourth year, you earned $700 in interest. So we need to calculate how much total is in your bank account so we can get another column here, the total money. So we need to find out how much is total in your bank account at all these time points. So year 0, you got 0 interest, but that was when you first opened up your bank account. You opened it up for $10,000. So $10,000, you have $10,000 in there at the beginning. Then after 1 year, you earned $100 in interest. So your total would be 10,100. So after year 1, you would have had $10,100 in your bank account. Now after year 2, you earned $250 in interest. So that $10,100 that you had last year, you need to add $250 to that, which gives you $10,350. And then the third year, you earned $450 in interest, so you need to add that $450 to the $10,350 you had the year before. So that would give you $10,800 in interest, because 10,350 plus 450 is 10,800. And finally, after year 4, you earn $700 in interest, and so you add that $700 in interest to the 10,800 you had the year before, so that gives you $11,500 total in your bank account. So now we have a new column here, this total column, and that's what it's asking you to graph. It's asking you to graph the total amount. So in this new graph that we're doing, what would be the x-axis that we would use? Which column in this table would be the x-axis, your x values? So your x values would still be the years, because we're using over time, over 4 years, over 4 years of earning interest. So this time would be your x values. There's your x. And remember, your x values is the purple line that goes from side to side. So let's label that x-axis time, and we'll put in parentheses years. Okay, now, so for your y-axis, the pink line in the graph that goes up and down, what would we be putting for the y-axis? Now remember, the question asks you for graphing the total amount. So on your amount line, or your y-axis line, we're going to have the total amount, not just the interest earned. So your y values is going to be these totals over here in this column. So this is what we're going to graph on the up and down line on the y-axis. So let's label that total money. And if you look on the total money, we're going to have to graph all the way up to $11,500. Well, we don't have room on this line to make every single little square $1. And last time we made every increment, every one of these little pink lines, these increments, we made these $100. But we don't have room to even make these $100 anymore, because if we did 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, 800, 900, 1,000, we'd only have room for $1,000. So we're going to have to do something different. We're going to have to make these a lot larger so they can all fit on there. So what happens if we made each of these increments $1,000? Well, that would give us $1,000, and I'm just putting 1 for 1,000, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, 5,000, 6,000, 700, 7,000. As you can see, we're still not going to have room to fit $11,500 on here. So let's erase this. So what if we made this, each of these increments, $2,000 each? So this first increment would be 2,000, and then 4,000, and then 6,000, and then 8,000, and then 10,000, and then 12,000. So we could do that. We could make it $2,000 each. But if we make that $2,000, but if we make these $2,000 each, then as you can see, our totals that we have to graph are between 10,000 and 11,500. So the 10,000 mark would be up here, up at this line, and the 11,500 mark would be right around here, around this line. So that doesn't give us very much space to play with all these totals just between those two lines. So let's not make these increments $2,000 each either. Now what we can do is we can change these increment levels. Do you see how these increment levels are one increment every two boxes? See, here's one box and here's two boxes, and I have lines every two boxes. What we can do is we can change these increments to spread out a little farther apart so we get a better graph, a better looking graph. And you'll see what I mean in a minute if this is confusing. So if we move these increments up to every three boxes and make them 2,000 each, then that's going to give us a little bit more room to make this graph, so it's just more easily readable. It's not, it's kind of an art form. There's no right or wrong answer. It's just making it so it's more easily readable. So if we make this increment every three boxes $2,000, so that's 2,000, 4,000, 6,000, 8,000, 10,000, and 12,000. At least that's going to give us a little tiny bit of room. So we're going to mark this where we say total money, and we're going to put in $2,000 increments. Now let's go back to graphing this. Now that we know what we're going to graph on our x-axis, the purple is the years, and the total amount in our bank account is going to be on the y-axis. So first of all, we have year 0, and in year 0 you made your deposit of $10,000. So in year 0 you're going to have $10,000 in that bank account. So in year 0, the years is on the x-axis, the purple line, and we're not going to count over any increments because it's year 0, it's the very beginning. So we're going to be at the very beginning of this timeline. So that's going to be year 0. But we don't make a dot there. We have to count up to the $10,000 mark. So right here on the pink line on this y-axis, we're going to make our dot to represent year 0, $10,000. Now the next set of values is year 1, $10,100. So we're going to count over on the purple, on the x-axis, we're going to count over to year 1, and we're going to count up to $10,100. Well, we know that here's $10,000 in year 1, but how do we do $10,100 if we only have increments between 10,000 and then 12,000 up there, 3 boxes up? Well, we just have to kind of estimate. We know that between 10,000 and 12,000 is 11,000, so about halfway through the middle there is going to be 11,000. And we know between the 11,000 and the 10,000 mark, halfway between that is going to be 10,500, which is right about here. So we know 10,100 is just going to barely be above the 10,000 mark. So now the next set of values is on year 2. You're going to have $10,350 in there. So we're going to go down to the purple, the x-axis, and we're going to count over 1, 2 increments for 2 years. And we're going to go all the way up. We're going to follow that y-axis on the 2-year mark all the way up to 10,350, which is just going to be just teeny tiny above the $10,100 mark. So as you can see, we're making very small increments here on the y-axis. and that's okay. Now the third year, year 3, your fourth set of values, year 3, you have $10,800 in the account. So we're going to go down to the x-axis, the purple, the time. We're going to go over 3 increments for 3 years, and we're going to follow that up, up, up until we get to $10,800. Now we know 10,500 is right about here. So 10,800 is just a little bit above it. Now for year 4, we have $11,500 in the bank account. So we're going to go down to our x-axis and we're going to count over 4 years. Here's 4. And we're going to follow that up, up, up until we get to 11,500. Well, we know that 11,000 is right about here and 12,000 is right here. So 11,500 would be right in between 11,000 and 12,000. So it would be this dot right here, just kind of smack in between those two. And let me erase the other marks that I made here. And so now we have our graph of how much money you had total in your bank account over the 4 years of earning interest. So we're just going to draw a line between all these dots, and as you can see, it kind of curves upward like this. And so that is your line, and you see how it increases more and more each time. Each dot gets higher and higher. It's not a diagonal line, it actually gets higher than it got higher than last time. So if you were to keep going up, it would go up like this in like a curve, in a curvy shape. It wouldn't go up in like just a diagonal slope. A diagonal slope would just be going this way, straight up, diagonally. But this is actually going to go up in like a curvy slope. So you're going to get higher and higher. The higher you go, the higher you go.